commenting on those matters in public and affect the investigations, the outcome of the investigations, and also can violate the rights of the defendants in the litigation or those under investigation.
We are certain, thank you, Chris. We're certain that that's a rather narrow scope of questions, so we anticipate a robust discussion today about these reports and the follow-up. So as I mentioned, in February, I became aware of the separate issues of gang charges for protesters and challenge coins, and I asked the city attorney to retain the law firm of Ballard Spahr to investigate and provide public reports of what happened. I was aware of Ballard Spahr because they had issued a review in January 2021 of the Philadelphia Police Department and their handling of protests that occurred in 2020 in Philadelphia, and did a thorough and credible job. I believe the Ballard Spahr reports for us provide a clear assessment of what happened and helped illuminate what next steps we must take. We thought it was important for you to hear directly from the investigators and ask any of them questions you may have. So with that in mind, I will now introduce the lead attorney from the Ballard Spahr team, Mr. Hank Hockheimer. And after his presentation, I will give a brief report on follow-up, and then we will go to discussion. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hockheimer and his team.
Thank you, Mr. Zuercher. Can you all hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, as Mr. Zuercher mentioned, my name is Hank Hockheimer. I'm an attorney with Ballard Spahr. I'm based in Philadelphia. I want to take a moment to introduce the team that worked on this. We have Brad Gershell, who's in one of the boxes. He's based in New York. Jillian Andrews of our firm is based in Phoenix. And Terry Grugan, or Terrence Grugan, and myself are based out of Philadelphia. All are members of Ballard Spahr's White Collar and Government Investigations team. I'm the practice group leader of that team, and we conduct investigations around the country for companies and public entities on a variety of issues. And as Mr. Zuercher alluded to, this past year we were hired by the controller for the city of Philadelphia to conduct an investigation into the city's response to protests that occurred following the murder of George Floyd. That investigation reviewed multiple agencies within Philadelphia, but prominently the police department. And the result of that investigation, again, as Mr. Zuercher alluded to, was the issuance of a report that also contained numerous recommendations. Many of those recommendations have been implemented already by the Philadelphia Police Department, and others are in the process of being implemented. So we thank Mr. Zuercher for giving us the opportunity, and we thank Mayor Gallego, Vice Mayor Garcia, and all council members for the opportunity to discuss both of our reports today in this council session. So I believe we have a PowerPoint that will make its way on the screen. And we can go to the first, next page, please. So as Mr. Zuercher said, we were retained by the city to conduct an independent inquiry into the Phoenix Police Department's role in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office decision to prosecute protesters for assisting a criminal street gang. Just to sort of reset things for all of you, on October 17th of 2020, there was a protest in downtown Phoenix. About an hour into that protest, the police declared an unlawful assembly, which gave them the right to arrest protesters at that point. Several protesters were arrested for charges ranging from obstruction of a public thoroughfare to conspiracy to assault police officers. And again, that was on October 17th. 10 days later, before a Maricopa County grand jury, the criminal gang charges were presented, and ultimately an indictment was issued under the criminal gang statute against several protesters. And that's what we were hired to come in and look at the collaboration, if any, from the City of Phoenix in connection, City of Phoenix Police Department in connection with those charges. Next slide, please. So in particular, the scope of our investigation was essentially threefold. One, did the Phoenix Police Department collaborate with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office in bringing the criminal street gang charges? Two, who within the police department participated or was aware of that effort? And three, were any Phoenix Police Department policies or protocols ignored in connection with the bringing of those charges. Next slide, please. So investigation findings were several, the first of which we found is that the decision to charge the protesters under the criminal street gang statute was in fact made collaboratively among officials of the Phoenix Police Department and the MCAO, and included consultation with other law enforcement agencies as well, including the FBI and the Gilbert Police Department. This collaboration to file charges against this group called ACAB, and that pointedly omitted the Phoenix Police Department's Gang Enforcement Unit, GEU, in an apparent violation of policy. And just we'll talk more about the GEU a little bit down the road in the presentation, but it's a specialized unit within the Phoenix Police Department that has experience in identifying criminal street gangs and also is familiar with and has experience with the policies and procedures and protocols that have to be used in order to designate a organization or group as a criminal street gang and file charges under the criminal street gang statute. Next slide, please. ACAB is a slogan, not a cohesive or recognized group. Some protesters chanted during this protest, "All cops are bastards," and that is ACAB is the acronym for that. Some protesters had tattoos symbolizing ACAB, but it's not a formal, cohesive or recognized group. Next slide, please. Further on our findings, we found, and again, just to back up, we interviewed lots of police officers. We reviewed thousands of documents to come up with these findings. And this finding in particular, we say that as the police and prosecutors built the criminal street gang case, we found through the interviews of several witnesses that the Gang Enforcement Unit was intentionally excluded in order to, as one police officer told us during an interview, to, quote, keep things quiet. We found that the GEU was affirmatively siloed and sidelined from any significant role in the bringing of these charges against these protesters. We also found that the police department ignored an expert established criteria for identifying a true criminal street gang, and also ignored established protocols for processing the gang classification. Ultimately, there was no credible evidence to substantiate the classification of this ACAB group of people as a formal group or gang in the context of a criminal street gang, or that the protesters at issue who were charged under the criminal street gang statute would resort to violence. Next slide, please. During the course of our investigation, we also became aware that in April of 2021, at the request of Chief Williams, the Phoenix Police Department Special Investigation Detail started an investigation into possible perjury committed by a Phoenix Police Department sergeant for his grand jury testimony. That testimony was on October 27th of 2020, and that led to the charges under the criminal street gang statute. As we reviewed what SID did, we determined that they ended their investigation roughly a month after it started. The SID investigation found insufficient evidence to proceed with their review. They also acknowledged that their investigation methodology was unorthodox. We certainly agree with that characterization. We think it was both unorthodox, and we found that it was also flawed in that the sergeant who presented this matter before the Maricopa County grand jury that led to the charges under the street gang statute, that sergeant was never interviewed by the SID investigators, and there was no attempt to speak with anyone from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office either. Next slide. So we'll talk briefly about our recommendations, all of which are contained in the report. The first was that we recommend that a separate law enforcement agency be retained to conduct a thorough investigation, review the investigative steps taken by SID, and acknowledge that they were limited, and that since more information is now available, an independent agency, law enforcement agencies should come in and review this. I mean, just a note about that. Like I said in the beginning, we do these investigations all over the country, but we are hampered by a few things. One, we don't have subpoena power. We can't compel witnesses to speak with us. We can't compel witnesses or organizations to produce documents to us. However, a separate law enforcement agency does have subpoena power and does have the power to compel witness testimony and the production of documents. We also recommend that the police department revise their investigative guidelines to inform the use of the criminal street gang statute, and that they should really set forth clearly in writing what it expects from officers and investigators who engage in gang-related investigations, and really reaffirm the dominance of the GEU and their role in gang charges, that they really should be the point people within the department to investigate and ultimately decide whether charges under the criminal street gang statute are warranted. We issue a recommendation that the police department's policy for information gathering and analysis in connection with criminal street gang charges should be bolstered and set forth more clearly in writing.
Thank you, Hank. Just to follow up on that, and then we'll return for council questions of Hank and his team or anybody in the city side. We just want to go over the response to these recommendations very quickly. First, employee conduct has to be addressed clearly. It's important to note, as Hank mentioned, Ballard SPAR did not have authority to recommend or institute specific discipline or to criminally review any city employee. That was not the scope of their engagement. Rather, they were to define areas the city should follow up for further investigation. The potential to deprive people of liberty because of First Amendment protest is very serious, and even more serious is if criminal conduct occurred in determining charges, writing reports, or testifying before a grand jury. Therefore, I asked for an external review as recommended by Ballard SPAR. I first started with the Arizona Attorney General's office, who declined jurisdiction. We asked the Yavapai County Attorney's office, who was interested, but she had a conflict that she could not clear. We talked to the Coconino County Attorney's office. Coconino, as a smaller office, just simply did not have the investigative resources necessary to assist us. We asked the Department of Public Safety, who declined, and, as has been noted recently, asked the Tucson Police Department. Initially, in my conversations with the Tucson City Manager, he agreed that they could take the engagement, but as they have dug into it a little more, he has since clarified with me that Tucson Police needs to review what the scope of the engagement would be to ensure that Tucson Police has sufficient resources to commit to this and still service their community. So we'll continue to work to answer the Tucson Police Department questions, and I am hopeful that Tucson will be able to take this on, but they still have some work to do before they can make a definitive answer to that question. Finally, we have administrative investigations that are underway. It's important to note that our employees do have due process rights, which will have to be followed and should be followed. The Professional Standards Bureau, the City Attorney's Office, and Human Resources together will conduct the administrative reviews. And also, just as noted publicly, I have also issued discipline to Chief Williams for her role in this matter. Chief Williams has taken some steps, recognizing the problems as outlined in the report of a meeting with leadership where no one stepped into the breach to object to this bad idea and to stop the bad idea or to communicate about the bad idea. She has reorganized her executive staff, her assistant chiefs, and replaced and rotated some folks around inside her executive leadership team. Also, the tactical response unit personnel who are named in this report, she has said will no longer serve in the tactical response unit, which is an assignment in the police department. It is not a right of employment. Next, there were serious breaches of public trust that must never happen again. So Chief Williams has begun a policy review process. In some cases, there may have been policies that didn't exist. More often, there are policies that needed to be strengthened in the following areas. First and foremost is a protection of First Amendment rights of protesters, even when and particularly when protesters are expressing views that may be opposed to the police department. And in all cases, we have an obligation to protect First Amendment rights. Also to strengthen, as Hank mentioned, the investigation protocols for gang determination of gang affiliation and gang charging. Also to ensure appropriate oversight of coordination with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office on criminal charges for protesters. There was clearly an over-reliance, over-dependence by the police department on MCAO and maybe vice versa that we need to address to maintain appropriate professional separation of the police and the prosecutors. And also, and very importantly, we need a review of our special investigation detail. As Mr. Hockheimer noted, there were serious flaws in how they began to conduct their investigation, which is why we have taken it to an outside agency. One of the most disturbing parts of the report was a failure to properly vet the ideas to Maricopa County attorneys, of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and individual Phoenix police officers. And so proper notification and assessment was missed, and therefore the chief is establishing clear protocols to elevate significant issues to her without an option to delegate in areas such as whenever there's a recommendation to deviate from department policy or operations orders, it must come directly to the chief. If in issues of significant employee conduct must come directly to the chief, and interests of significant community-wide concern must come directly to the chief. Another problem was the difficulties noted by Ballard Spahr in sometimes getting timely information from the Phoenix Police Department. So therefore, in the records and follow-up records area, those delays mean that the law department and the chief have begun an administrative investigation of the issues that Ballard Spahr encountered to ensure that we have removed those obstacles in the future. Finally, this entire report raised issues about how the downtown operations unit and the tactical response unit are structured to effectively respond to extensive periods of protests. The downtown operations unit bears the biggest brunt of this because many of our protests occur downtown, and the tactical response unit is that unit designated to respond to protests as well. So we need an effective TRU that's organized for success. So we have additionally charged our contracted external review team of 21 CP Solutions, which the mayor and council appointed in March. We have asked them, in addition to their original task, to review the protest tactics and also our training modules. We've asked them to do a further review of how to better organize the DOU and the TRU so that they can be organized to be successful and to ensure the respectful treatment of protesters. Mayor, members of the council, with that, Mr. Hockheimer and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Mayor?
Thank you so much. Council member questions and comments. Here. Is that Councilwoman Pastor?
Guardado.
Guardado, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just had a couple of questions here, and not exactly sure how you be able to answer this. But if our Office of Accountability and Transparency was active and it was up and running, how would they have handled this investigation and given the different investigative power that we have in place? What type of roadblocks would they have hit during this investigation? And if you can give us some examples in terms of what the Office of Accountability and Transparency would be able to investigate and how they would have actually handled this.
Thank you, Councilman Guardado. That's an excellent question, given the council's recent adoption of an Office of Accountability and Transparency and the fact that we're in the middle of recruiting for that. I think it's an important question. What the OAT will provide us will be an alternative within the city, a designated alternative within the city when the Phoenix Police Department can't investigate itself or shouldn't investigate itself. So we would be able to use the Office of Accountability and Transparency to basically do the things that we had Ballard SPAR do. But the advantage that OAT would have would be that they would be city employees, and therefore in their administrative investigation or administrative review, city employees would be obligated to speak to them as city employees. So OAT would provide us another avenue, an independent internal avenue that would be an option to use if we felt that an external avenue, such as we used with Ballard SPAR, would be less effective.
And just follow up with that, just thinking about the people, the interviews that were held. How many folks declined interviews that should have been interviewed, given the case?
I'll actually ask Mr. Hockheimer to answer that question because his team were the ones who actually did those interviews.
Yeah, so on the Councilmember Guardado, on the protest investigation, this report, we were able to interview most of the people, if not all. The challenge going, we haven't gotten to that yet. That was a little more of a challenge, so to speak, as far as being able to interview people, and I can give specifics once we talk about that report. But my colleague, Brad Gershell, is on the line, and he may have a little more specifics on the interview. But I think most of the people we wanted to speak with, we were able to. We tried at one point during the investigation to interview people from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and we were declined that overture. But as to the police department, Brad, anything on that?
Mr. Hockheimer, thank you. You got that right. There were no personnel within the department that we sought an interview from who declined ultimately.
I would add also, Councilwoman, one of the challenges, but this would not be something that OAT could overcome, was that when employees no longer work for the city of Phoenix, for example, we had people who were working for us before when the incidents happened but have since retired. They are under no obligation in an administrative review or an external review such as Ballard conducted to talk to us. That would be the same with OAT. So we would have the challenge of interviewing retired or departed employees in either case.
Okay. And then one of my last questions, where are we in the hiring of the director or putting our office in place, given all the challenges and these investigations, and with DOJ also here working with us? Like, where are we in terms of accelerating that process, or a timeline on when this office would be active?
Thank you, Councilwoman. The director of the Office of Accountability and Transparency, that process is underway. We have received applications and have closed the application process. Deputy City Manager Spencer is doing some sessions to talk with folks about characteristics, and the interviews will be taking place in September. So our goal is to have that person hired this fall, and depending on whether they're from within the region or whether they have to move to the region, their start date could be anywhere from the fall or January, just depending on whether there's any relocation necessary with that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. And I think it is important to note the City of Phoenix has filed litigation against the state of Arizona. In the state budget, they attempted to restrict cities in many ways, including our Office of Accountability and Transparency. The budget is a document to fund government and not to implement these type of public policies. And I'm hopeful, as I think many of my colleagues are, that litigation will be successful in that area. We'll go to Councilwoman Ansari and then the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And I have a number of questions regarding a little bit of elaboration about the strengthening of policy and the timeline. So the first one, I think one of the pieces of this that was most concerning to me was the ability to exclude the gang unit from the decision-making here. So can you elaborate a bit on the process or policies that might be put in place to address interagency collaboration and to prevent the ability to bypass entities that are meant to be tasked with certain aspects within the department?
Yes, definitely, Councilwoman. That is an important piece of this follow-up, and I'm going to ask Chief Jerry.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ansari, so what we're working through right now is making sure that the gang unit will be consulted in all gang syndicate investigations. And if any street gang charges have to be approved by me when it's run through the First Amendment process. So we're removing the ability of the line level employee to make that kind of independent decision, and it has to come all the way up to my level.
Got it. Okay. And then in regards to the actions to be taken in response, in the report it says, quote, investigations have been opened on all staff having a role in the report, and Ed spoke to this. Can someone speak to the timeline of the reorganization and when council will be notified of the results?
Certainly, I think there's two parts to that question I want to address. The first one has to do with disciplinary reviews. Those are very, very tightly controlled by our civil service rules, our memorandums of understanding, and in the case of police officers, the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. So the due process for those folks is very important and is going to be followed. And it's pretty difficult to always put a specific timeline on that because of the need to follow all the due process steps. But I'll let the chief respond if she has a sense of that timeline. And then the chief also has already undertaken her reorganization, so she can speak to that as well. Chief?
Well, thank you, boss. Councilwoman Ansari, let's start with the reorganization first.
Okay.
So three assistant chiefs were reassigned back to commanders, and then I promoted 3 more assistant chiefs to increase communication, increase transparency. Also of note, in the downtown operations and the tactical response unit, a lieutenant, 3 sergeants, and 9 officers have been removed from their assignments, and we're going to have to fill in those processes. So those employees will no longer be part of the downtown operations or the tactical response unit. Because I had a personnel and systems failure, especially at the patrol level to some degree, I now have 2 patrol chiefs as opposed to just 1. I've had very strict and stringent conversations with my new team and new staff about the expectations to absolutely, without fail, keep me informed of things that rise to a significant level of community interest, a significant level of council interest, a significant level of city management interest. And everyone is keenly aware of that. And I could close by saying also that had a very strong discussion and talk with our command team, I believe it was last week, where we're really focusing on getting things right, recovering from our mistakes, and making sure that I am informed of everything that I need to be informed of without fail.
Okay, thank you. And then similarly, when will the results of the CP Solutions review be available?
I'll ask the Assistant City Manager Barton to answer that. He's been supervising that contract. Jeff?
Councilwoman, and sorry, members of the council. The original scope of the report was expanded, as Ed mentioned in his opening remarks. We would have had a report from 21 CP Solutions at the end of this month, but with the expanded scope, our expectation is that that report will be due to us in draft format sometime near the end of October.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. And I understand that the PSB investigations conflicted with the timing of these reports that we're reviewing today. Do you think that those investigations pose any delays to this CP Solutions report? And given just the urgency of the situation and the very rightful call from the community that we're seeing for urgent reform, do you see, or have you put a plan in place to avoid any further delays?
Yeah, the PSB investigations are about individual behaviors. The 21 CP Solution is about the structure and the organization. So those two should not be in conflict with each other, and one should not delay the other.
Okay. Perfect. That's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Vice Mayor Garcia.
Mayor, and I'd do some questions to you and then go back to the chief. Have we as a city or has the city attorney office reached out to help clear the records of those who were wrongfully charged? What's been our role in that? I'll ask that first.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. I did have a conversation with the city attorney and the city prosecutor about what the legal steps are from that request. So I'm just take a second here. The city prosecutor is here. If you want to ask another question, we'll circle back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
If that's okay.
just to further that question
Yeah.
would be, have we ran an audit to clear the records or of anyone that was wrongfully charged last summer, not just of that particular day? And I think what's important about that is these cases were brought to light because of how egregious they were, because of the community work to bring it to attention to the media, and obviously these investigations. And so I think it is really important for us to make sure that it didn't happen in other instances, and also to make sure that we're doing right by those folks that were wrongfully charged, as we're being told by these reports.
I'll see if the city attorney can respond. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor, Councilman Garcia, the process to clear the records of those individuals is going to be done through the county because the charges were brought by the county. They were felony charges charged at the county, not the city prosecutor's office. However, the city prosecutor has been in contact with them about that and is going to follow up with them now to find out what the status or what's happening with that. The individuals generally have to make a request, but that can be expedited, and we're checking to see what the status is.
I think it's first of all, I think it's our responsibility, especially since we've gotten this information, to make sure that all those records are clear. Along with that, and we've had in previous committee meetings, conversations about Brady list or do not testify list. Are we taking any steps to put officers on a Brady list, or what steps are we taking as a city to make sure that folks who've already lied on the stand or in different situations are no longer able to do that?
Thank you. Yes, Chief Assistant City Attorney Julie Cree is here. She can answer that question.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we are looking closely at who should be looked at for the Brady list. As you know, in order to complete that review for the Brady list, we need to complete our internal PSB investigations, and of course, any criminal investigations will have to be completed first. So we will definitely be forwarding that list to the prosecutor's office for review upon completion of those reviews.
So no, just to be clear, no officer involved in any of this investigation or that participated last summer is currently on a Brady list?
We have referred some officers and they are in the process of review with the prosecutor's office.
So we wouldn't know if in the last couple of months or since this happened, if there was officers that were involved in this that have testified or against folks?
Mayor and Council, so we are looking at all available evidence, but for the Brady list process, anybody that is under review also has the right to due process right to appeal and to review any charges. So we do have some officers that are currently under review under the Brady list, but they are still going through that process.
Hypothetically, if these officers were to be found of wrongdoing, would that jeopardize the investigations since this has happened in the last months of their testimony?
Mayor and Council, no, I don't believe that they would be separate reviews because they're separate standards.
Okay, I think what I'm trying to say is if we found officers of wrongdoing or making things up or doing whatever they were doing, I think that jeopardizes their testimony in any cases moving forward if they participate after that, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, Council Member, I
Yeah.
misunderstood your question. Yes, absolutely. If they are placed on the Brady list, if an officer is placed on the Brady list, then any further cases where they will be a witness, that must be disclosed to the